Missing out on your summer holidays this year? Well, why not go on a sound journey with Maddie Moat and discover the exciting sounds of science and nature from the comfort of your own home? In each podcast episode, Maddie is joined by experts to guide you on all kinds of journeys into a beehive, down the plug hole, or even up into a cloud. And along the way, you'll help Maddie create a new piece of music made from the noises you discover. Listen out for interesting sounds as you go along. You'll be going to some very interesting places because sound explorers can go anywhere. The first 5 episodes are available to listen to now, so what are you waiting for? Just search for Maddie's Sound Explorers wherever you listen to your podcasts. Hello, welcome along to the Fun Kids Science Weekly. My name's Dan. This is the only podcast that promises to unravel all the true secrets of the universe. Now this week we've got another ecology special, supported by the British Ecological Society. Now remember, we spoke about this a few weeks ago. Ecology is all about how living things affect each other, how human, animals and plants interact, and all play a part in the ecosystem of our planet. This week you can hear how the COVID-19 pandemic also plays a part in that as well, and you can find out how you can learn to do your own ecology in your own back garden. First, let's jump into it with one of our favourite experts on the show. Here's climate genius Marina Ventura.
Marina Ventura's Climate Explorers.
Hi there, Marina Ventura here. I love finding out about the natural world, and that includes the Earth's climate. We know that weather can change from one day to the next, but climates can change too over the time span of years, centuries, or even longer. So I'm on a mission to fill MapApp with the latest climate information with the help of some awesome climate explorers. Come on then, let's go. We are lucky that most of us live in comfortable homes and have enough to eat. Just imagine if we didn't. What would we do? Maybe we'd move somewhere else, if we could. But what if we couldn't? Now, other than our pampered pets, animals don't live in houses, but they do have habitats. Places that are safe and comfortable for them to live in with enough sources of food to keep them going. As climates change, these habitats can change too. Isn't that right, Mappy?
It certainly is. Animals and plant life are affected by climate change just as much as humans can be. And whilst most species can cope and adapt with gradual changes, rapid changes and the loss of natural habitats can create challenges for wildlife.
Let's find out more from someone who studies a very interesting animal in a very beautiful place.
Hi, I'm Rose and I'm a conservation scientist. I study animals and the food they eat, and that's something that can change as the climate changes. Changing climates can affect wildlife in lots of ways. Some animals, like frogs and newts, are very sensitive to temperature and may die if their homes become much warmer or colder. A changing climate may affect the vegetation that grows, and this might mean that there isn't enough for the animals to eat, or may mean that animals can't safely nest or build homes. Sometimes the animals might be able to migrate or move to a new habitat, but if not, animals can be short of food and may die out. I work on tropical islands and study the Aldabra giant tortoise, carefully looking at what they eat, so we can understand what we call food webs. What's eating what, or who's eating who.
But there must be a lot of tortoises to study. How on earth do you figure out what they've had for dinner?
It's the poo that tells us what the tortoises had to eat. We look at the plant DNA found in the poo, and this tells us exactly which plants the tortoises have been eating. Food webs can give us information about the effect of climate change on animal populations and how they are changing too.
So, how has the change in climate affected the tortoises?
Well, the island where these tortoises came from originally is called the Aldabra Atoll. It's a place in the Indian Ocean that's at risk of being submerged because of rising sea levels. If this happens, these tortoises could die out. Luckily, some tortoises have been moved by scientists to other islands in the Indian Ocean where different types of tortoises have already become extinct. We're looking at what the tortoises eat in their new homes to see how their presence affects the food web.
Lucky tortoises having you on their side. Thanks, Rose. We share the world with millions of varieties of plants and animals, and all of them are affected by changes in the climate. And we might not think they affect us, but don't forget, humans are part of a food web too.
All this talk of food is making me hungry for an upload.
Ready, Mappy?
Load me up.
Next time, we'll be looking at what you can do to help reduce the impact we have on our environment.
Marina Ventura's Climate Explorers, supported by the Natural Environment Research Council, the science of the natural world. Find out more at funkidslive.com/marina.
We'll be back with more ecology stuff in just a sec. First, I want to get the answers to your science questions. This is what you have left as a review over on Apple Podcasts. First up today, we've got Archie, who is 11 years old, who asks a question which I cannot believe we haven't covered before. And I've looked through my notes from past episodes, and I don't think we have. Archie asks, why do we get hiccups? It's a great question. The part of your body that is to blame is the diaphragm, which is the muscle. It's kind of a domed-shaped muscle right at the bottom of your chest. Normally, it works perfectly. When you breathe in, it will pull down to suck air into the lungs, and when it relaxes, you breathe out. But sometimes that diaphragm becomes a little irritated. Maybe if you eat too quickly, or you eat too much, or you breathe in kind of strangely for a second, it might throw things out of kilter down there. And when that happens, the diaphragm moves out of your control for a while. And when that happens, you get hiccups, which is when you have short bursts of air sucking in, and you make that gulping noise. Now, lots of people have like ways to stop hiccups. I'm sure someone you know says you need to hold your breath for 50 minutes or whatever it is, or say the alphabet backwards. For me, I stretch. I reach really tall into the air, and I find that always works. Thank you for that, Archie. This is from Hugo, who is 9 years old, who asks another brilliant question. When you see someone yawn, why do you yawn too? Hugo, we don't exactly know. Scientists have got their ideas as well, so I can't give you anything definite, but I'll run you through their thoughts at the moment. One is that your brain naturally does it to show empathy, which is so to show that you understand how someone else is feeling. When someone smiles, you naturally smile back to show, hey, you know, I'm like you. Scientists think that might be why you yawn. Or it could be that we are hardwired to do it, that our ancient ancestors did it as a warning sign maybe about threats. What threat could that be? Why would you yawn as a threat? I don't know, if you were tired, if you lacked energy. That's another idea. Also, they think maybe the younger that you are, the more that you do it, and the more grown up you are, the older you get, the less that you catch yawning. But that's that one done, Hugo. Thank you so much. And this is one from someone that's called themselves I Love Fun Kids, and I love that name. But the question is an odd one. They say, what does a zebra do? It's a bit general, isn't it? A zebra does what all animals do. They try to find food and shelter to survive. That's kind of the number one thing that all creatures out there do, try and survive. Zebras, to do that, they constantly move around for fresh grass to eat and water to drink. Sometimes they'll travel thousands of miles for food, and they're very social creatures, so they do it in groups, which they call herds. So that's just a little bit of what a zebra does in a day. Thank you so much for the question, though. If you've got something sciencey that you want answered on this show, leave it for us as a review over on Apple Podcasts. Right, let's get back to the ecology. It's the Fun Kids Science Weekly. It's our ecology special. And chatting to us now, we have Dr. Lindsay Turnbull. She's from Oxford University, and she's got a fantastic online video series called Back Garden Biology. She's here to tell us more. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi there, Dan.
Thank you so much for joining us. Listen, there are so many episodes of Back Garden Biology. You're dealing with so many different things in the world of ecology that we can find outside. How did you get the idea that you wanted to focus on what's out there, what wildlife is in the soil, what's up in trees, and that you wanted to bring it to life for us?
Well, it started with the lockdown, obviously. At the end of last term at Oxford, we knew that the students were going home and that they weren't going to be coming back. And that felt like a huge thing, as I'm sure it did for children up and down the country, when they realised their schools were closed and they wouldn't be going back. And I just wanted to find another way to communicate with my students. So I'd never made videos like that before, but I thought, well, given that we're all going to be in lockdown and they're going to be trapped inside possibly, and the only place we were allowed to go really was our own back gardens, if you were lucky enough to have one, of course, then I thought it might be nice to just go out there, see what I could see and see what stories I could tell about biology just from the things I could find in my back garden every week.
And how easy is it to actually find something in your back garden? If I went into mine, I'd see maybe a couple of birds. If I got down into the dirty soil, maybe I might see some worms. When you see these things, you say stories are opening up to you. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, that's obviously because I am a biologist and I've spent a lifetime learning about biology. So obviously that's a bit different to an average person who maybe doesn't have that. But I would say in your back garden, you could probably find a lot more than you think. Yes, you've got to look a bit for it. And it helps if your back garden is set up to attract wildlife, if you feed the birds, for example, or you maybe let some of your lawn grow longer to let more things come and live in it, or you plant the kind of flowers that bees like to come and visit. But every week I've been out in my back garden, I have found some very different things. But yes, it's true. If you didn't know anything at all, getting that starting point can be a little bit tricky. But there is an amazing amount of information out there now on the web. All kinds of different organisations put information out there to help you identify the things you're seeing.
Can you tell us more about that ecosystem? The cities that are out there, Lindsay. So if I go out into my garden and maybe I dig up a little bit of soil, if I were to root down there, what would I find? How many creatures are likely to be down there?
Golly, and your soil. Well, it would really depend on what time of year you did it. So if you started digging the topsoil in the middle of summer, you might be surprised how little you would find. The soil is full of worms, but they're smart, and they don't stay in the topsoil to be baked through the summer months. They go down much deeper. So it's better to try to find some cool, damp soil if you want to dig in soil. But yeah, there's certainly loads and loads of worms aerating the soil, taking dead leaves down into the soil and eating them. There are lots of fast-moving things on the surface of the soil. If you turn over stones, you might see a fantastic iridescent ground beetle come running out quickly that often have amazing glinting iridescent colours. They're always a nice thing to find. And they're a real friend to the gardener because they're rushing about and they're predatory. So normally, as a kind of rule of thumb, if something moves really quickly, then it's probably a predator and it's chasing down prey. And if it moves very slowly, then it's more likely to be eating plants, and then you might not be quite so keen to see it in your garden.
And how much of these, this is quite a question that might be a bit too wide and unanswerable, but how much are these creatures aware of each other? Not necessarily the creatures that eat one another, so the iridescent beetles maybe crawling after something smaller, a bird flying down, snacking on a worm. How much is a squirrel aware of an ant, perhaps, that it's running past, or a bird aware of a squirrel that it's flying over? So can you just, how many of these creatures in the city that are in your back garden, how much do they know about what else is out there?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. What does their world look like? And it's one of the things as a child, especially, I often thought about, and I still sometimes think about it now. What does the world look like to a bird? What does the world look like to a bee? And certainly, for something like a bird, they have really good visual systems. They see colour in the way we do. So perhaps they see the world in quite a similar way to the way we do. But we know that other things don't at all. Lots of mammals don't have colour vision, for example. And lots of mammals actually have really poor eyesight. So you can stand out quietly in my back garden at the moment. I have a hedgehog coming to visit, which is obviously a really wonderful thing. And it doesn't know you're there a lot of the time. It will come really, really close to you. And then suddenly you see it take fright. And it's not because you've made a noise or it's suddenly seen you, but it's probably smelt you. And so lots of animals use different parts of their sensory systems. And I think that's something that's really fascinating. The world to a dog really is very different. In terms of what they're taking notice of, I think probably they are quite attuned to taking notice of things that matter to them. So the bird might notice the squirrel because squirrels can potentially take the eggs of birds, for example. I'm not sure a squirrel would really have much interest in an ant, to be honest. I reckon it's probably not that interested in that.
When the creatures are interested in one another, when they are aware, is it just a big spur of the moment thing? So a bird might see a squirrel coming to take the egg and think, oh, that's a squirrel, I know what they are. Or do they know that they're part of this massive complex system, do you think?
No, I really don't think they know that. I think that's what sets humans apart, right? That's what sets us apart. We have a concept of a world in which we're only one player. We might be a very big player, but we have that conscious ability to appreciate, I live on a planet, it's full of other things. I understand that to some extent, but I don't think there is any other species that really has quite that same understanding. It may be that some of the animals like gorillas or like dolphins have a better sense of their environment and their, what's around them. But I don't think they've got that all-encompassing idea. No, I think that's a uniquely human feature, probably.
And the ecosystem that we're around isn't just in our garden, it extends to what's outside. If we were going to do some maybe not back garden biology, but back street, back alley, behind the house, front garden biology, what's in the bus stop biology, what would we find if we were there?
Well, I think you can find biology wherever you go. And that's one of the really nice things about having biology as your interest in life. I would say that's something that I've always been interested in from my earliest memories were being completely interested in dinosaurs. And then I moved on to the actual things I could still see. And I've never been anywhere where I haven't been able to see really cool things. And so one of the coolest things I've seen recently while making back garden biology was as we were allowed to go out a little bit more and I could leave my back garden, I went round to a little local park, and it's a very kind of ordinary park, short grass that's mowed heavily, people play football on it, and there's a few trees around, and there are some big poplar trees, and I noticed there were some holes at the bottom of those poplar trees, and I thought, well, that's interesting. That obviously, to me as a biologist, told me that something's emerging from the wood of the trees, and what might it be? So I did a bit of research, and I found out that there is an incredible moth that eats the tree. So the eggs are laid in the tree, the big caterpillar eats its way through the wood and might spend 2 or 3 years doing that. And just in June, they will emerge for a couple of weeks, and they are fantastic looking moths, very big, and they look exactly like a gigantic wasp. And that's obviously a mechanism on their part so that they don't get attacked by birds, because birds don't want to attack giant wasps, and so they won't take a chance on these moths. So I went out there, I knew they only emerged early in the morning, and I had only a very small chance of seeing them. And I was sitting in this little corner of the park at 6 o'clock in the morning, and one of these things emerged. And I was just sitting in a really ordinary place. There was a dog poo bin next to me. That's how ordinary it was. And yet there was still this really amazing, rare thing. And I think all those things are out there. And if you make that bit of effort and you want to see something unusual and amazing, you can. And it doesn't have to be in a nature reserve, or you don't have to go to the Galapagos Islands to see it. There's loads of really cool things in Britain, and some of them absolutely are in towns and cities.
Perhaps if you weren't sat by a dog poo bin and you were out in your back garden where you do your biology, what's been the most incredible thing that you've seen so far while you've been making the series?
Well, I think that hornet moth, that was its name, I'm not sure I made that clear. That hornet moth was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I'd seen it in my books, I knew it existed, but I didn't realise, it was just the sort of thing I thought, well, I'll never see one of those. And then it just happened to be seeing these trees, seeing the holes, thinking maybe they're there, asking a couple of people, did they think it might be possible? And them saying, well, it might be, and this is a good time of year, why don't you get up early and have a look? And, you feel a bit of an idiot, right, sitting out there on your anorak at 6:30 in the morning with some few joggers going past, thinking, what am I doing here? But then there it was, this amazing, beautiful thing. So I think that was the coolest thing I've seen. In terms of some of the stories that I've been telling, I've just been making one about parasitic plants, vampire plants that plug in to other plants and suck the sap from the hardworking normal plants, if you like. And I find that amazing too, that so many of the species in the world are parasites. About half the species in the world are parasites. So that's kind of a cool thing to think about.
Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on the Science Weekly and telling us more. It's Back Garden Biology. You can find it. Just give it a search online. The videos will come up. They are amazing. Dr. Lindsay Turnbull, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Dan. Lovely to talk to you.
Now, before we get into this week's Dangerous Dan, I just want to give you something to think about. We touched on this as well in our last ecology episode. And this week, it's all about what we have in common with COVID-19. The Clovid Pandemic has seen us trying to defeat like an invisible enemy, or at least it's invisible without a microscope, isn't it? The coronavirus has attacked millions of people across the world. It's caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. But we do think about the virus as something horrible and scary, even evil some of the times, and none of us want to get ill or want someone that we love to get ill. But when you think about it, it's going to sound weird, but we actually do have quite a bit in common with the virus. Just have a listen to this. You see, a virus wants to live just like we do. It wants to reproduce just like many humans do. It needs a place to live where it can get the resources that it needs to survive just like we do. It just happens that the perfect place for the virus to do that is inside our bodies, and it causes harm while it's doing it. Viruses, you see, are just part of the natural world. They're part of the ecosystem. They're not evil necessarily. They're just viruses. They don't actually want to kill their hosts. That would be like you setting fire to your own home. There would be no one left to infect, so the virus would die out. Ecologists actually refer to successful viruses as the ones who are mega contagious, but that cause fairly mild symptoms, so no one really minds. So they don't do too much harm to their hosts, but they do just enough damage that they can stay there and survive. We've actually got a lot more in common with viruses than you might think. Now, for this week's Dangerous Dan, we're talking about parasites. Parasites are living organisms. Just like humans, they have their part to play in the ecology of the planet. A parasite is an organism that takes without giving anything back. Now listen to this, it's a deadly parasite, not to us but for ants. It's incredibly nasty. It's called the Zombie Ant Fungus. Listen to what it does. It gets into the ant's brain and then it kind of takes it over, forcing the ant to climb up a plant to the height of 25 centimetres exactly. Then it will stop, and when it's there, this fungus will burst out of the ant's brain and start to grow, as 25 centimetres is the perfect height for it to grow at. Now, almost half of the organisms on the Earth are parasites. They're so common, and they're actually quite useful because we've evolved over time to boost our health and our immunity. Because of these parasites, these disgusting, nasty things that steal and don't give anything back, they've actually made us stronger.
Gecko is brought to you by Fun Kids with the British Ecological Society, advancing ecology and making it count.
Hello, I'm Gecko, a lizard who loves ecology. No plant or animal can live on its own. We all need each other to survive. Why don't you join me as we find out more? Today we're in the Antarctic, close to the South Pole, one of the coldest and driest places on Earth. In winter it's minus 80 degrees Celsius here, and in summer only rises to a balmy 0 degrees. Did you know it's actually a desert? I'm not joking. A desert is actually just a place where there is less than 10 centimetres of rainfall a year, and that's true of Antarctica. You would certainly get sunburn here too, with almost 24 hours of sunshine a day in summertime, even though it's so cold. Isn't that weird? There's not much plant or animal life on the land, so if you want to see what lives here, you'll need to look in the water. Let's go! Algae grows in the sea and makes a nice meal for small creatures called krill. There's a massive swarm of them now. There's millions of them. They travel in huge numbers, as many as 30,000 in a space not much bigger than a bathtub. This means the seals, penguins and whales who live in the ocean around Antarctica have a ready supply of food. Here's some penguins now. I'm sure you recognise them. These are emperor penguins, very famous birds with their smart black and white feathers and fat tummies. They have clever ways to survive in these extreme temperatures, as well as a thick layer of fat and heavy feathers. Their bodies are great at directing energy to the organs that need it most. He's diving into the icy water to catch some krill. Amazingly, he can go underwater for up to 18 minutes. I bet you can't hold your breath that long. The penguin's body is so clever that its bones and blood are specially designed to allow them to dive for long periods. Just don't expect to see them fly. Right, I'm off. See you next time.
Eco Bite. Ecologists are interested in food webs, who eats what, and even who eats who. Closer to home, did you know you can see food webs in your garden? A simple food web in your garden might be this: that a snail eats the plants, a bird then swoops down and eats the snail, and then a fox eats the bird. It's useful to understand the food webs in any ecosystem because it means we can predict what happens when plant life changes, or the impact of extinction. If all the snails in your garden became extinct, the plants might be happier, but the birds might go hungry. If you had to draw a food web for human beings, what else would be in it? Join us again next time when we find out more about ecology on Fun Kids. Echo Gecko is brought to you by Fun Kids with the British Ecological Society, advancing ecology and making it count.
It's the Fun Kids Science Weekly. It's one of our ecology specials. Chatting to us now, we've got science author Dr. Danny Rabiotti from ZSL Institute of Zoology on the line. Hey, Danny.
Hi there.
Firstly, before we get into it, may I say you've published 2 books that I can find fantastic names on both of them. Does It Fart or True or Poo? Brilliant stuff there. Just like, let's get in early. For a kids science podcast, you got that down. Now, this is an ecology special. I thought we would start off with you, Danny. If you could just talk to us about, like, really what the study of ecology is and how animals interacting with each other and interacting with the world around us, it plays a big part in what we do every day. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, so ecology is essentially the field of science that involves living organisms, so plants or animals, not so much human biology, that generally comes under medicine and medical adjacent subjects. But yeah, things to do with plants and animals, the ecosystems that they live in, that's what ecology is. And it's really important for us because in the same way that the natural world is important for us, understanding the natural world around us allows us to understand what it provides, like things like clean water. Pollinators are really important for pollinating the crops of the food that we eat. And on another level, if we care about the plants and animals around us, then we don't really want them to go extinct. So a lot of branches of ecology are to do with conservation and protecting those organisms from extinction as well.
And what don't we know? Because we've been studying ecology for quite a while now. We know the creatures that are around us. What are we still finding out? Like, when you go to work every day, how do you know at all what you're looking for? What questions are you still asking?
So a lot of things that we don't know are about the effects of our actions, and then also how to protect the natural world from those actions. So for me, for example, I look at climate change impacts on biodiversity, so the animals and plants that live around us. And we don't necessarily know how they're going to respond to climate change. So one thing that ecologists can do is to, for example, run experiments in the field, or for me, I run models on the computer, and that allows us to look at how things might be affected by climate change, and then also what sort of things we might be able to do to stop any negative impacts. But that can apply to any issues. So, for example, some ecologists will be looking at the impacts of hunting. Some ecologists will be looking at the impacts of deforestation. So that's definitely one area where we're constantly looking into, because we don't often know what human actions are going to cause in the natural environment unless it's already happened. So a lot of it's trying to predict that so that we can prevent any negative effects on, for example, water quality or any extinctions that might cause. So that's a really big part of it. But also, we don't know a lot of basic ecology about certain animals and plants still, particularly if they're quite rare. It can be really hard to find and observe them. Ecologists, particularly a branch of science that is very adjacent and overlaps a lot with ecology, called taxonomy, they're still discovering new species all the time. So there's actually animal and plants that we don't even know exist. And that all comes under ecology as well. And if we don't know they exist, we definitely don't know what habitat they live in. We don't know what predators eat them. So those kind of really basic fundamental things are also still a lot of unknowns out there.
Speaking about climate change there, Danny, I recently spoke to a scientist who was focusing on the big anthropause at the moment. So while humans have been in lockdown for the last few months, they've seen great differences in how animals are acting, where they're going, what they're doing. In a similar way, but probably in a much more negative sense, how has climate change affected the way animals are getting by day to day? I know that you say we don't know everything, but who's having the worst time of all the creatures, and maybe who isn't being affected too much?
So with climate change, the effects on animals and plants are overwhelmingly negative. Climate change interacts a lot with habitat loss. So normally, if the climate were to heat up, animals and plants, as long as they could move quickly enough, they would move to areas that were cooler as where they live now got hotter. That can be a problem for species that live at the top of a mountain or for species that already live in the poles because they haven't really got anywhere to move to. But generally, that's what you would see happen. But in the world we live in today, we've actually got rid of a lot of animal habitat. So, for example, the species that I focus on, the African wild dog, only 7% of its historic habitat is left. So when it gets hotter, they don't actually have anywhere to move to. And that's where we have to look at these. They're called in-situ effects. And that means that if the animal stays where it is and it gets heated up, what's going to happen to it? And that's why we see really widespread impacts, because these animals have nowhere to move. It's actually not necessarily just because of climate change, but because of those effects of habitat loss as well. And as for which species are going to be most impacted, that can be quite hard to predict. But we know that those species I mentioned earlier, like those at the poles, animals that live in really small areas and have nowhere to move to, animals that live at the top of mountains, those sorts of, for example, island species, they also can't move anywhere. Those are often the species that we see that are going to be most impacted. But probably, and we're fairly certain, the animals that are going to be worse hit are corals and coral reefs, because they're not only affected by rising temperatures, but also ocean acidification and sea level rise. And what we are seeing a lot of already is bleaching of the corals. So that's when the algae that lives inside the coral and helps them to get nutrients is kicked out because the coral's stressed, and then it doesn't come back in again and the coral dies. So that's probably the most impacted. As for the least impacted, that will be things that live pretty well alongside people, like rats, cockroaches, probably not going to care too much.
Cockroaches see out everything, don't they? Like, we just need to steal how cockroaches get by day to day. Now, I'm going to check this out for a way that I'm going to link this directly back to something that you've done, because one of the main causes we know about climate change is methane that's in the air. It's produced by cows. It's produced by cows farting. You've written the whole book about animals farting, and we love you for it. Why is it important what animals fart and not?
So, interestingly, although cows do cause, they do create a lot of greenhouse gases, they actually mostly come from burps and not farts. So, while cows are responsible, it's cow burps, not cow farts, that are causing climate change. But I think the thing with which animals fart and which don't is... The one thing that really came out of that was we don't actually know for quite a few species. And this comes back to what I was saying before, that there's so many fundamental natural history things that we don't know. Like, we don't know if spiders fart. But if we don't know if they fart, how much do we really know about their digestive system? So I think that was a really interesting aspect of it, because you can really uncover a lot about where those knowledge gaps are from something that seems as frivolous as an animal farting.
So just let's hone in on this very, very, very quickly. In your research for the book, Does It Fart? By the way, the definitive field guide to animal flatulence. What animal were you quite surprised to learn does fart, and that led you to kind of figure out and solve quite a big puzzle about the creature, maybe?
So I think actually just there was probably more surprises on the not farting front. Although there's, if you look online about what animals don't fart, there's quite a lot of articles about kangaroos and how kangaroos don't fart. So they tried to put the bacteria from a kangaroo's guts into a cow to try and help stop the cow producing greenhouse gas. But it didn't work. And it didn't work because basically it's not really true that kangaroos don't fart. They do fart, just they don't produce quite as much gas as cows do. So that was one thing where if you just looked on the surface of things, you'd be like, oh, kangaroos don't fart. But actually, they do fart.
And how did you research this? How do other scientists figure this out? In the book, you've got a bit about clams that are vomiting but not farting. How can you possibly know if a clam under the sea is farting?
So I think some of it comes down to the definition. What is a fart? And that was where we had to start with all of this because, you know, there's this scientific term that's kind of similar to fart, which is flatulence. And that means any gas that is produced during digestion and it's expelled from specifically the anus. But not every animal has an anus. Not every fart is gas produced in digestion. So, for example, a lot of the gas that we fart out is just swallowed air. So we had to broaden our definition. And basically, we came up with that fart is any gas that comes out of the opposite end to an animal's head. So if an animal didn't really have a head and a butt, then it couldn't really fart. That was kind of where we landed on that. Because you can't really tell the difference between a fart and a burp if you don't know which end is the mouth and which end is the rear end.
You're a doctor, Danny. I love the idea. You're a doctor. What did you do over today at work? Oh, I just tried to define what an actual fart is. So you've done Does It Fart? You also did another book called True or Poo, and we're going to have some fun with this if that's okay. You're going to test me out. You're going to give me some of your favourite animal facts or fibs, and I need to figure out if it's true or if it's not. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do this. Cool. So, have you got any kind of animals in mind you want me to quiz me on, or we're just going off piste here? Any of my choice.
Any of your choice. You've literally written the book on it, so just chuck stuff at me, and we will prove how little I know. But that's fine because we'll discover it.
Okay, how about this one? White sand is made out of fish poo.
Now, see, the definition of white sand there is interesting. Now, I'm a lot of different things cause sand, doesn't it? Quite a lot. It's just rocks that are breaking up, rocks that are being bashed together time over millions and millions of years. I would imagine quite a lot of white sand is probably fish poo and other remains of fossilized fish. Yeah,
so a lot of white sand beaches are made up almost entirely of fish poo, especially in the Maldives. So it's not fossilized. It's actually from parrotfish. So they will eat coral. They scrape at it with their beaks. And then basically they digest anything that's digestible and they poo the rest out as really fine white sand. So each parrotfish can produce 90 kilograms of sand a year.
It's the Maldives as well. The Maldives is one of the fanciest, poshest places to go on holiday with glistening white beaches that you see online all the time. And you think, oh, I wish I was there. But you're sunbathing, lying down, catching the sun on parrotfish poo.
Yeah, you got very special fish to thank for that. Up to 85% of those beaches have been pooped out of a parrotfish. So, I mean, it's pretty relaxing thinking about it, just lying on the nice white fish poo.
Right, give us another one.
Polar bears, do they eat penguins?
No, they don't, because they're at two different places. Penguins only on the South Pole, polar bears up in the north.
You got it.
Yes!
Yeah. It's quite a common myth that like polar bears and penguins are hanging out together. But yeah, polar bears are at the North Pole and penguins mostly, apart from one location, live in the Southern Hemisphere. But they definitely don't go anywhere near the Arctic.
Aren't some penguins found in like very South Australia? Is that right?
Yeah, so it's still Southern Hemisphere. There's also penguins in South Africa. All over the Southern Hemisphere, really, but not straying up to the North Pole. No. Too far north.
Right, let's have one more then, Danny.
So how about, do you think that you eat spiders in your sleep?
It's something I've tried not to think about. I've heard that so many times that you eat spiders in your sleep, but I just assumed that was people trying to terrify me when I was at school. I do not believe you actually do eat spiders in your sleep. I reckon that is poo. It's not true.
Yeah, that's it. It's not true. Although some people have had spiders go in the mouth when they're asleep. It's really rare because a spider's not going to look at someone's mouth and it's really noisy and it's really wet and be like, oh, that looks really cozy, I'm going to climb in there.
I think you would feel it.
They tend to avoid it.
Yeah, I think you would feel it. I think, people saying you eat 8 spiders a month or whatever sometimes you hear people say. Surely you would feel every now and then a spider crawling over your face.
Yeah, well, I guess with like penny spiders, they're pretty small, so you might not necessarily hear it. But the main thing, or feel it, but the main thing is that it's not a good habitat for them, so they're not going to climb into your mouth if they can help it. But it's more likely that you might have eaten a spider or some other insects in your food.
What?
Not just if you wash it. Sometimes you find caterpillars or whatever. But the US Food and Drug Administration reports that there could be as many as 400 insect fragments per 50 grams of cinnamon, for example.
Cinnamon, of all things. I don't eat a lot of cinnamon. I'm not that fancy, Danny. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. So, 2 books, that's right, isn't it? You've got Does It Fart? You've got True or Poo. Amazing work discovering what's really going on out there in the world of ecology. Danny Rabiotti, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, before we go, I want to flag up 2 real hot topics that ecologists are talking about at the moment. And they're all about our food and our drink. Now, most of us live in places where we can buy what we need to survive in shops, can't we? Now, ecologists are worried about food security, making sure that we have access to safe and nutritious food that is good for us, but we can do that in a way that doesn't harm the planet. Because we don't want to over-farm and use up all our resources. We don't want to make factories that make our food but also harm the earth. We don't want other countries to take food from others that might need it. Ecologists are working really hard to come up with ways to make sure that everyone has enough to eat and we don't harm the planet at the same time. And it's not just food that's concerning ecologists, also water is, because there are parts of the world where drinking water isn't always available. And scientists are working really hard to get water to the people that need it without having too much of a flooding risk. It's always a fine balance. That's what ecology is about, really, making humans, plants and animals figure out the best way of working with each other and working with the planet. And that is it for this week's Fun Kids Science Weekly. The Science Weekly Ecology Specials are supported by the British Ecological Society. You can find out loads more about ecology over on their website, britishecologicalsociety.org. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found out loads about the Earth, about humans, about animals, about plants, and how we all fit together and work together to make the planet a much better place. If you've got any questions about something you've heard or anything sciencey at all, really, leave it for me as a review over on Apple Podcasts. Find the Fun Kids Science Weekly there. You can leave a little comment in the bottom, put it in the box. I'll see it. Make sure you leave your name as well so I know who to say hello to. While you're on Apple Podcasts, it's one of the best places that you can find all of our science series. We've got loads of podcast ones on there. You've heard some today. We've got loads more on Apple, also on Spotify and Google, wherever else you get your shows from. They're on the free Fun Kids app too. And Fun Kids are a children's radio station from the UK. You can hear us all over the country on your DAB digital radio and at funkidslive.com.